Here's where it's all happening, folks. North of the Western Australia's Kimberley coastline and to the west of the top end coastline. This is where it's all happening. Look at this amazing amount of convection here developing and then streaming off out to the west. So this is where we're going to see this tropical low form as it pushes toward, or we've already seen it form, but as it pushes towards the west-southwest and deepens significantly over the next few days before it adopts a more southwest or southerly track. And then in the long term, we'll talk about it shortly, but this is where it's all happening, and you can really clearly see that on this satellite imagery. There's also another little very, very weak low way out here, but that's not going to do anything. That's pretty well almost dead now, but this is where it's all happening. If we take a region-wide view, and courtesy of WeatherZone, weatherzone.com.au for some excellent weather graphics, we can see some excellent convection forming to the north of Australia associated with a very active or becoming a very active monsoon trough. Unfortunately, that monsoon trough is too far to the north to actually affect the Australian mainland, so we're getting quite dry conditions still over most of northern parts of Australia. There is a little bit of storm activity or convergent activity developing right along the northern coast of the top end, but really we're still in a pre-monsoonal phase throughout the country. We are seeing a distinct difference in where the winds are going, though, and where the clouds and storms are going. So anywhere sort of north of the Northern Territory coastline is everything seems to be streaming to the west. Now, if you follow these clouds, you can see that they're starting to stream off to the west in the upper levels. Anything sort of east of that, east of the Gulf country, streaming off to the east. And that's to do with a jet stream or a subtropical jet stream that seems to be right over the top of northern Queensland and the central Coral Sea, streaming all this cloud out to the east, creating massive amounts of wind shear and making it very unfavourable. It's pretty well almost a winter pattern, in fact, out here in the Coral Sea, whereas the pattern out here over the top of the Northern Territory, over the top of WA, seems to be more of a summer pattern, what we would expect it to be this time of year. Whereas out here, very, very unusual pattern, and hopefully won't last for too much longer, because as long as that stays, there will be no wet season for North Queensland until that goes away. So we're hoping that that happens sometime in the next week or two. Another great graphic provided by WeatherZone here is the expected amount of rainfall over the next week, issued today, and we can see that still mostly void of rainfall across northern Queensland, because once again we're still stuck in that upper level pattern that suggests a very wintry type pattern. Even though the temperatures are heating up and the oceans are heating up, there's just absolutely no chance for a cyclone to get going in this area. No real monsoon on the way either over the next week, so still remaining reasonably dry in comparison to average. So remember that 40-50 mils on the coast this time of year for the week is still dry in comparison to average. Now, if we look at the NT, though, the GFS model is very aggressive and develops a monsoon over the next week that starts to impact the coastline, both in the northeast and the northwest parts of the territory. Obviously, the cyclone that we're going to talk about tonight is having a key influence in the rainfall that happens here over the Pilbara, Kimberley, and even the far northern parts of the Kimberley. So this is the variable, this is the highest amount of variability that we're going to see here, is where this rain exactly is going to fall. Now that particular projection assumes that the cyclone is going to hit east of Headland, which at this stage doesn't seem very likely. At this stage we're starting to look more towards the Exmouth, Coral Bay, all the way through to Karratha. Headland seems to be a little bit too far to the east to be under the most potential long-term threat. It seems to be more to the west. So Barrow Island obviously included in that lot. I know there's a lot of our viewers that are very interested in what happens in Barrow Island. Definitely in the threat zone for the long term. If we compare that to the European model for the next 7 days, we see very similar areas of rain. However, the European keeps these numbers out here, by the way, are in inches. This is an American chart, so the numbers are in inches. But so multiply those by 25 mils to get them in millimeters. So 2 times 25 is 50. That's what you get with the orange. So you can see here that the European over the next 7 days keeps pretty well all of the tropical rain offshore and very, very close to the coast associated with tropical cyclone, or what will be tropical cyclone Narelle. But unlike the GFS model, it doesn't smack it straight into headland. It has it pushing just to the west of the coastline, and with it, most of the rain remains offshore. However, we do see a fair bit of rainfall in some convergent banding occurring here, 50 millimetres plus in the area from sort of headland west all the way west to pretty much Exmouth. So there is certainly potential for rain as the cyclone remains slightly offshore. But even in the top end of the territory, we've got most of the rainfall remaining offshore for the next 7 days. Obviously, nothing really happening for Queensland. There is a little bit of an onshore stream here, creating 25 to 50 mils in parts of the wet tropics. But really, those parts would be expecting more around the 100 to 200 mils in the week, as opposed to 50 mils or 20 to 50 mils. Very, very little respite in sight for anyone in the Gulf country. The Gulf country is just extremely dry at the moment. So if we do get a tropical low or cyclone forming, it's going to be, and we'll talk about that, the Gulf potential later, it's going to be in the far northern or northwestern parts of the Gulf, and then will likely to push southwest or west across the top end coast. Luckily and hopefully that might be the catalyst for the start of a monsoon over the Northern Territory. At the moment, Queensland is probably going to have to wait. There is a tropical low that should form here, but it will likely push southeast and remain offshore and maintain a south to southeasterly flow onto the coast, and with very limited moisture coming onto the coast, unfortunately. So there's the three areas I've just mentioned there that we are watching. Tropical cyclone Narelle should be the low that forms here and pushes southwest. There's a new tropical low in the Coral Sea that will form in a couple of days and will push southeast or east-southeast. And there's a new tropical low possibly forming on the northwestern edge of the Gulf of Carpentaria in about a week's time, and that should also start to push towards the southwest or west. That one there should hopefully be the catalyst for the onset of the Northern Territory monsoon. We'll still wait a little bit longer, I'd say, for the onset of the Queensland monsoon. But anyway, that's the outlook for the next week. Let's now have a look at the tropical lows in more detail. So this is in a nutshell what's going to happen. We're going to get this tropical low, which is already formed. It's going to push a little bit to the west-southwest. It's going to sit there for a little while tomorrow, and then on Tuesday expected to become a tropical cyclone by the morning time, as it pushes a little bit further to the west-southwest, and continues then to push in a bit more southwesterly direction by late Tuesday. This is the monsoon trough finally making an appearance, by the way, but still remaining north of the continent, unfortunately. As we head into Wednesday, the cyclone is expected to start pushing in a southwesterly direction. Wednesday night, a little bit more in a south-southwesterly direction. Once again, monsoon trough remaining north. But we are starting to see this low developing near Papua New Guinea by Wednesday. And that low should then continue to push southeast. We get a fractured monsoon trough here where there's good monsoonal northwesterlies to the north, but no real monsoonal flow onto the Australian mainland, unfortunately. This low in the Coral Sea doesn't really form into much, but remains along a trough line, remains fairly elongated, and doesn't do too much except move a little bit further to the south or southeast. This cyclone actually starts to push a little bit more southerly, and this is why we're starting to think that it's going to become a bit more of a threat in the longer term. So this is by Thursday night. We expect it to be well off the Pilbara coastline, but pushing in a more southerly direction as opposed to what the modelling has been showing so far, which is a more westerly direction. Today's model guidance has varied a little bit from what we've been looking at and has pushing this system a little bit further to the south. Still not quite south completely, so we're still not thinking anywhere sort of east of headland, but anywhere west of that at the moment looks reasonable in terms of potential threat towards the end of the week and into the weekend and even early next week, depending on how fast it moves. Okay, so now let's have a look at what the ensemble modelling from the Euro is showing. And we have, by Wednesday morning, we have this area here in this red circle that is the likely region of the tropical cyclone. Now you can see that area still has about 1,000 kilometers of variability to it. So it could be just off the Kimberley coastline to an extremely long way off the coastline. Now, if it manages to get itself into that position, then perhaps our threat of any coastal crossing later on is diminished. But if it manages to get itself into this position or this position, then we need to be very, very alert as to what the future will hold for it. We also see a little area of low pressure possibly forming there, and also some lower pressures in the Coral Sea. This is at 72 hours, so this is by Wednesday morning. By Thursday morning, the model has done the hard work for us and has put the red circle where it should be. And we can see there that most of the modelling suggesting directly north of headland is where the system will lie Thursday morning, and the fact that it is in a red circle suggests that by Thursday morning we're almost surely talking about a tropical cyclone. The other area of interest here remains the far northern parts of the Gulf, possibly even extending out to the northern Coral Sea in a trough type feature. But with no real area of extremely low pressure. So, like we just saw, we're not seeing that low that forms near PNG actually forming into anything too significant. Now, once again, the modelling has done the hard work for us for Friday as well by putting the big red circle in the area that the tropical low should be, or tropical cyclone Narelle should be by that stage. This is areas that are under 1,000 hectopascals. Now we can see inside that region of under 1,000 hectopascals we have two little subcircles. We have one circle here and another circle here. That suggests that if the system is the strongest potential for this system to be deepest lies in the western edge of this red circle. So there's more chance of the system being deeper if it remains there, or if it gets to there, than it is to get to anywhere else in this red circle. That's what it means in a nutshell. Now, over here in the Northern Gulf, we continue to see this area of development, according to the ensemble. Still not moving anywhere, but still potentially a low pressure system. Once again, Coral Sea looks fairly troughy as opposed to a low. It looks more like a trough type system there, maybe an elongated low in there somewhere. Alright, now by Saturday morning, we could be seeing a landfall anywhere to the west of headland, all the way through to Exmouth, or we could be seeing the cyclone still a few hundred kilometres off the coast. There is no clear definitive evidence at this early lead time that says it's going to cross the coast somewhere yet. But if we were to favour a region of potential crossing, if it was to cross the coast, it would be west of headland, particularly favouring this really, really tight area between Karratha and Exmouth, including obviously Barrow Island being in the threat zone there. At least in the medium term, so the Thursday to Saturday period. After that, if it hasn't crossed the coast, it may do a bit of a round loop-de-loop and come back and hit the coast a little bit further south. That's where the modelling is projecting at the moment. So if you're living in that headland west area, you probably need to start to prepare your cyclone kits just in case it takes this track and actually hits the coast. Most of the modelling still suggests it's going to stay just off the coast, but even if that happens, you're still going to see 30 knot plus winds blowing in the coastal regions here, as well as some fairly heavy rainfall. We just saw the rain predictions there from the European, that even if it follows this track just offshore, you're still going to see 20 to maybe even 100 millimetres, depending on where you are and how close you are to that convergent banding of rainfall near that coastline. So despite the fact that the model is still showing it slightly offshore, you're still going to see strong winds. And if let's say this scenario comes out where it hits the land here, then you're going to be seeing some very destructive winds. At this stage, model projections anywhere from a Cat 2 to a Cat 4 is what we're looking at by the time it gets to this region. Over the northern Gulf, we see this area of low pressure is now drifting to the west, so it's moving that way and into the territory. Now, with any luck, if that low pushes to the west, it will actually, hopefully, and what we're hoping it'll do, is drag down the monsoon trough onto the mainland. And so that's what we're hoping will happen. We see a secondary region of lowish pressure there, and then we see probably a third region of lowish pressure there. That we probably need to watch as that time gets closer. But with any luck, if that low forms in the northern Gulf of Carpentaria, it will push to the west or southwest because, and we'll go through some steering influences right now. Okay, what we're looking at now, folks, is the 72 hours, so back to Wednesday again, and we're looking at what is happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Why is this cyclone not just going boom straight into the coast, and why is the GFS scenario, which has it smacking straight into the eastern Pilbara or southern Kimberley, why is that not the likely scenario? And the reason we see is here, this big upper level high. This big upper level high will try to push this cyclone in that direction. Now, to make things difficult, though, we have a very, very strong northwest surge of the monsoon to the north of this, which is going to try and skew that direction slightly and push it to the a little bit more south of the actual flow here. So the flow here is going to try and push it straight west. It's going to want to push south of that. So it's going to try and push southwest from there. And so it's going to have a few different forces acting on it. And eventually, what happens to this high will determine whether this cyclone hits the coast or whether it scoots just to the east, just to the west, and then rounds the corner and eventually hits the coast. Let's see what the ensemble model does with this. Now here's where it gets interesting, folks. This is Thursday. Now on Thursday, the model has this high. Remember how this high was really big and it was just south of this tropical cyclone? This high now weakens, pushes a little bit further to the east, and now the cyclone is free to be guided by its momentum, and it'll want to push more to the south rather than southwest. So this is the point at which the steering breaks down. So rather than wanting to push in this way to the west, it's going to now want to push more in this way to the south, or more this way to the south-southwest. Now how quickly this steering breaks down, and if there's anything else that comes in its place, will determine whether this eventually hits the coast between Headland and Exmouth, or whether it pushes to the west of Exmouth and out here into the cooler waters and may recurve back in towards WA as a much weaker system or a low. So it's a very, very, it's really hanging on a knife edge depending on how fast the steering level breaks down on Thursday, and depending on whether anything else will come in its place to try and push it directly south from there. Now the other thing you might notice here is its green shading. Now the green shading suggests that the ridge may actually still be in place. So even though the ensemble overall is suggesting the ridge breaks down, the ridge may still be in place and may still be a little stronger than the ensemble showing here. And so we still have that possibility that even up till Thursday, the system continues to move to the west. Let's have a look what happens on Friday. Oh, before we do that, let's have a look at the Coral Sea. The Coral Sea still has upper level westerlies pushing through it. The upper trough over the Coral Sea starts to weaken, but overall, we still see a slight west to east movement. So any tropical low that forms with any depth out here will continue to move in a northwest to southeast direction, but albeit slower than it has been doing. The Coral Sea has been terrible for troughing so far this season. Hopefully we're starting to see a trend that will weaken that off, and we'll start to see a more summer pattern happening starting from maybe this weekend. But at that stage, at Thursday, if there's a tropical low here, it's moving southeast. Alright folks, by Friday we have this high, this upper level high has now pushed over southern Queensland and the south central Northern Territory, and also the northern parts of South Australia and New South Wales. So this high now is no longer governing the movement of this tropical cyclone. Now what we can also see is these lines here are starting to jut out to the north. Now when that starts to happen, it creates what we see as a trough line on the 500 hectopascal level, and that trough will want to start to push these northwesterly upper level winds. And so what's going to try and happen is they're going to try and push the cyclone in a northwest to southeast direction. So the cyclone by Friday, according to that steering pattern, will try to push into this region here. Now, where it's already positioned by that stage will really determine whether it's going to actually cross the coast or whether it's going to go very close to the coast. Now, at the moment, the models really don't know which way they want to lean to, and I'll show you some of the different modelling. Of interest, the Northern Gulf of Carpentaria, that low that develops, is now going to definitely have to push to the west because that high has reorganised directly underneath it. Now lows, I know for North Queensland, that's not the news you were hoping. Lows will not push directly into a ridge. They will try to push alongside the ridge, and they'll try to basically ride the ridge. And you can see here's the ridge, and that's the direction the upper level winds will be blowing. That's positive for if you're looking for cyclones coming off the Coral Sea, because it means the upper troughs are gone by Friday, and it means that anything in the Coral Sea at that stage should start to move back to the west as well. But in terms of this Gulf low, there's very little chance of it actually hitting Queensland. It's off to the NT, that one will go. Alright, but this is the key one. This is the one we're all watching. I'm going to briefly go now through all the models and show you what they're all tipping. Okay, folks, first cab off the rank model-wise, the UK Met. The UK Met, west, 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 around about the 8th, 9th, around about the 9th, we start to see that ridge in the upper levels break down, and we start to see a more southwest to then south direction, still placing it, if it doesn't recurve, still going to place this outside of contact with land. So hopefully that scenario comes off. Now if it does recurve, then we've got issues. But the other good thing if it does recurve is that it may create an extra wind shear. So as it pushes southeast, it may weaken, but let's not bank on that. Let's hope for this track firstly, which pushes it well to the west of the mainland. So this is 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. The colour coding suggests strengths, and strengths are out here, and you can see they're getting down to between 960 to 970 hectopascals between the 11th and 12th, and sitting at around about 970 to 980 hectopascals throughout its lifetime, really. So quite an intense little system, category 3 according to the UK Met. If we take a look at our Coral Sea system, here it is on the 8th, develops just off the tip of PNG, pushes to the east, then the southeast, and then sort of just lingers. Between the 10th to the 12th, it moves east, but it doesn't really move anywhere fast. Getting it down to about 1,000 hectopascals, so it is certainly developing it between the 9th and the 11th of January. There is certainly going to be reasonable conditions there for its further development, but there is still going to be a lot of shear. So in terms of the fact that it's going to have a northwesterly flow, it's going to have a decent surface vorticity in there, decent surface convergence, but in the upper levels there's still going to be those westerly winds in the Coral Sea until around about the 12th or 13th of January, and then that's when those things ease off, and that's when we might see some further development of this system. But at this stage in the foreseeable future, nothing there. Okay, this is the GFS model, and we see here it's already formed, pushing it to the west and then pushing it to the south. Actually hits the coast around to the east of Headland and almost, well, basically skirts the coast anywhere from just north of Derby. Starts to skirt the coast and just to the west of Broome as a Cat 1, Cat 2 type system. And then hits the coast as a Cat 1-2 system and then pushes just inland of the Pilbara. Now, this model breaks down the ridge very quickly that's guiding the system, and that's a big difference between it and the UK and the EC model, is that the ridge breaks down very quickly and it decides to push south very fast. Now if this happens, this will be a huge rain producer for the Kimberley Pilbara. We're still very skeptical on this forecast though. Just like we said, the GFS last night in our video and the night before, we're very skeptical about the output that it's putting out at the moment with regards to this low. Here's what it does with the Coral Sea. The GFS develops the Coral Sea low in the Gulf of Papua around the 6th or the 7th of January, pushes it southeast, forms it, develops it a little bit, so by the end of it we're looking at 1,000 to 1,005 hectopascal low, but nowhere near enough to suggest any real development. And then weakens it off just as quickly before its end of its forecast run around the 12th of January due to increasing wind shear. Interestingly, just like the European model, the GFS model is picking up this development of a tropical low on the northwestern edge of the Gulf of Carpentaria, or the southeastern parts of the Arafura Sea, pushing it around the 11th to the 12th of January, smacking it into Gove, and then pushing it just inland of the coast as a fairly significant tropical low. So a big rain producer if this comes off. As I say, still skeptical on that forecast, but it's got some fairly good agreement from the European model as well. So we will watch this one with interest, because this could be the onset of the monsoon for the northeastern and northern parts of the territory. So this could be a really good rain producer. Okay, the less accurate CMC model, but still need to be watched, has the cyclone already, the low already developed, developing into a tropical cyclone around about the 8th of January, a couple of days from now, developing it into quite a significant tropical cyclone as it pushes it to the south. We're talking Cat 3, possibly Cat 4 on impact here, around about the Headland to Karratha region is where this this model is predicting impact between the 11th and 12th of January. Very sudden as well. As I say, it's very similar to the GFS in its track, I guess, in a way, keeping it very close to the coast, breaking down the steering ridge very quickly. Fairly skeptical of this forecast, probably more looking a little bit west of that at this time. But probably the intensity is pretty close. Category 3 is what we'd be looking at the moment. Category 2 to 4, I said, is what most of the models are suggesting. So Category 3 is pretty spot on in intensity forecast, but yeah, just its track is slightly east of where we would think the system could go. For the Coral Sea low, it develops it on the 9th of January. Same spot, or pretty similar spots to most of the other models. Pushes it southeast. Does deepen it between the 10th and the 11th of January. Does deepen it into quite a significant tropical low, not quite a cyclone. And then, as we said, once those westerly winds break down in the upper levels by around about the 12th or 13th, it starts to slow it down, and it doesn't continue pushing it to the southeast. And that's something we'll probably see from most of the model guidance as we head in further this week. They'll start to pick up the fact that the upper ridging is coming into the Coral Sea and the upper troughing is leaving, and they'll start to break down the steering flow. So no longer will we continue to see these things pushing southeast indefinitely. We should start to see them slow and become more erratic. And finally, we have the no-gaps model. The no-gaps model pushes this thing to the west, develops it into a Cat 1/2 cyclone, but pushes it very slowly southwards, but hugs the coast, once again possibly suggesting a big rain producer. Look, there is two lines of thought, and I'm sure you're seeing it now with all of the models that we've shown you. The first line of thought is that it's going to push a long way to the west before it starts to drift south. The second school of thought is the ridge is just going to break down immediately almost over the next couple of days, and the system will track south and hug the coast. So they're the two schools of thought. At this stage, we're going with the European and the UK. The UK was the second one I showed you. The Euro was the first one I showed you, where they're going for a more westerly drift and then a more gradual turn to the southwest and south, either keeping it just off the coast or hitting the coast between more so Karratha and Exmouth. That's where we're heading. That's where we're heading with our thinking. All right, folks, I hope that that's cleared something up for you, at least, seeing that we're now starting to narrow down the regions that this thing could go. We're starting to look at potential intensities of Cat 2 to Cat 4. Most modeling's pretty clear on that sort of intensity level, intensity guidance. Even at this far out, the fact that they're starting to agree on at least the intensity side of things is starting to give us a little bit more confidence in their track forecasts. We're also, don't forget, looking at the Coral Sea. There is a low that's going to form there. That low will deepen a little. At this stage, not expected to become a tropical cyclone, but it is likely to deepen a little over the next few days, particularly later in this week. There's the third thing we're looking at, obviously, is the Northern Territory, the Gulf of Carpentaria, a new low developing there, and possibly, hopefully, yeehaw, is going to start the monsoon for Northern Australia. Let's cross our fingers and cross our toes that that does happen. There's a lot of places over the Northern Territory that have not seen a good build-up at all, and so hopefully that will bring in the monsoon finally. The Coral Sea, northeast Queensland, you might have to wait another week or two until things get better for you. But at this stage, let's have our fingers crossed for that Gulf of Carpentaria low. As I say, Coral Sea low, southeast, no cyclone at this stage. Northern Territory low, pushing to the southwest or west, possibly bringing in the monsoon trough. But the big news, Tropical Cyclone Narelle should form in the next couple of days off the northwest coast, and eventually strike threat zone for us at the moment is Karratha westwards. That will change, may change, will change, we're not sure. So keep it locked to us, and keep it, obviously, more importantly, locked to the bomb, because the bomb will have all the very latest data and all the very latest images that and information that they will provide you with. Thanks very much for watching tonight. No, it's a long one, but things are getting interesting. Good night. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update tonight, the 6th of January 2013. Before we start our update, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who purchased our documentary of Tropical Cyclone Lure. Together we managed to raise $50 for the Philippines Red Cross. So once again, a very big thank you for that. The other thing I'm pretty excited to mention tonight is that we are now up to 100 app downloads. So on your screen there, you'll see on our homepage, we've got a direct link to our Google Android download. And we've managed to hit 100 today, so that's a big milestone for us, and I'm sure there'll be hundreds more coming once the iPhone app comes out. And also, that app is now going to come in quite handy, especially if you live in northwest WA over the next 5 to 7 days as a tropical cyclone starts to bear down on you. More on that shortly. Now it's time to get my ugly mug off your TV or off your computer screen, and let's look at some models.